Robin Zander, scene A1.
Hello and welcome back to SNAFU. I'm Robin Zander, and I am so excited to sit down with today's guest, Carole Robin, PhD. Carole Robin is the co-founder of the Stanford infamous course affectionately known as Touchy Feely that was taught at and is still taught at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, the course on interpersonal human dynamics, interpersonal dynamics at the Stanford B School. She is now the co-founder of Leaders in Tech, an award-winning organization that helps leaders in technology and beyond develop the skills necessary to become exceptional leaders. She's the author of the best-selling book Connect, A Guide to Building Exceptional Relationships, and I am so thrilled to say that she is coming on stage at Responsive Conference 2024 for a 90-minute workshop with the entirety of the audience at Responsive Conference 2024 to teach some of the most important skills that first she taught in and developed for the Touchy Feely course at Stanford, and now does with leaders in technology and beyond through Leaders in Tech. So please enjoy this initial conversation with Carole Robin, and I hope to see you at Responsive Conference September 18th and 19th here in Oakland, California. Now into the interview. All right. Carole Robin, one of my favorite people, just because your last name is my first name, and I've always been fond of my name. We were just starting a conversation, and I suggested we take it live. Though we've never met before, we share a lot of overlapping circles.
We certainly do.
Adam Pisoni is one of the co-founders, co-authors of responsive.org. He was actually the very first person who ever sponsored Responsive Conference. He believed that I could start a conference when I was a no-name, volunteer thinking I might put on something. And
it sounds like Adam.
So, let's. There's so many places to start. When you're meeting somebody on an elevator or climbing up a mountain, what do you say as regards what is touchy feely?
Well, a little bit of it depends on the context is somebody I've never met, and just out of the blue they ask me what is touchy feely. Could you give me just a little more context? Because that might be what I would say.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we could just start with how do you
answer that question?
How do you introduce yourself?
Usually I introduce myself as Carole Robin, and when somebody says, what do you do? I often say I'm a co-founder of Leaders in Tech, and they say, what's that? And I say, it's a set of programs based on several decades of courses that I taught at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, including a course commonly known by the students as Touchy Feely, which is somewhat legendary. And then they say, what's Touchy Feely?
Perfect. Great. So 2 layers down. I've long regarded Touchy Feely as infamous. Right. As we've talked about with Adam Pisoni, who, as I understand it, was an early cohort member, maybe even one of the first people to go through.
I think he might have been cohort 2. Or 3, some early. We're in cohorts. We're about to launch cohort 8.
Okay, what is Touchy Feely?
So the course is actually called Interpersonal Dynamics. Okay, and the premise of the course is that in order to be both personally and professionally successful, you need to develop some interpersonal competencies, meaning it behooves us to understand how we show up in the world that either has other people want to spend more time with us, are more likely to be influenced by us, are inspired by us. Thus, the reason that Touchy Feely is taught at the Graduate School of Business, not hidden away somewhere in a psych department. And also, the reason that it's part of the leadership development curriculum at the business school. So, one of the things that I've always said is people do business with people. They don't do business with ideas or machines or products or money. They do business with people. So until you decide that that actually matters and you want to get better at that, uh, you might have the absolute best product in the world at the best time, and you will succeed. And eventually that will catch up with you. So if you want to build a sustainable, long-term, uh, successful venture, then paying attention to the people part, it probably is important. And furthermore, one of the things that happens, so I left Stanford in 2017 to start Leaders in Tech, and I still get, I mean, I get emails and calls and visits from students who took my class in the early 2000s, um, who and I get I just became a CEO. I'm pretty sure I owe it all to you. Well, we would expect that. They're all former MBAs from Stanford Business School. Um, I just raised my first round, and I owe it all to you. Now with Leaders in Tech, I get a lot of, I just raised another round. And I think I was much more successful in doing that as a result of what I learned at Leaders in Tech. And those are all very gratifying, and the ones that mean the most to me, Robin, the ones that really make me believe this is what I was put on the planet to do, are the calls that I get from former students and lit fellows who say, I'm pretty sure your class just saved my marriage. Or I just reconciled my relationship with my brother, who I hadn't talked to for 2 years because he voted for that other guy. And we actually have figured out how to repair our relationship, and I owe it all to what I learned. So, uh, that's maybe a longer answer than you were looking for, but it sets the stage for how I think about and feel about this work.
Amazing. I think about in my life, there have been a couple of moments, and I've been gifted with what feels like half a dozen moments in my life that changed the trajectory of my career and my life and my relationships, right? Just one in high school, my parents and I worked together to get me a transfer to Escuela de los Amigos, a friend's school in
Yeah.
Monteverde, Costa Rica. And I
Oh,
spent my second semester of my sophomore year of high school studying abroad, speaking Spanish and climbing trees and studying with actually UC Berkeley biologists who were working on their PhDs. And I was a high school student, right? And that counted as high school credit. And it opened up my eyes to what was possible and that education could look like this. Then I came back to high school and I was like, wait, like my rural town is so
that
small.
that must have been rough to come back to a
it
regular
was it
old
was
high
it was
school.
fine because I could then be like, oh, but now that I know what's possible, right? I'm gonna go study at the local junior college. I'm gonna graduate early. I'm gonna go to college early. Like, right? But that awareness of what's possible. And when I have heard by reputation about Touchy Feely and about leaders in tech, it captures that ethos and that spirit of what you've just described of like, sure, I've started a successful business, but more importantly, I've learned to communicate with my spouse, or I've developed a relationship with my child that I didn't know was possible,
Right.
right? And that it's almost like the title perhaps of your next book, The Art of Possibility, right? Like what what becomes possible when we think to dream a little bit differently.
I love that. I find, first of all, I'm very inspired by your story and your framing just now. Um, I believe with every cell of my being, Robin, that if we got a critical mass of people on this planet equipped with these skills and competencies, we wouldn't just have better teams, more functional organizations. We would have a vastly different world. We'd have more functional families. We'd have stronger communities. We'd have, God forbid, a more functional government. You know, I used to think the course should have been called Connecting Across Differences
Nice.
because it's easy to connect with people that are just like you, think just like you, view the world just like you. And frankly, I think what's missing is people don't know how to, and they think that connection is premised on similarity as opposed to curiosity and inquiry and learning and possibility,
Hmm.
to use your word.
There's so many places that I'm excited to go. I'm trying to just decide. Let's actually start with what is Leaders in Tech. What is the organization that you founded and that you are running for entrepreneurs and for leaders today?
Well, for starters, I co-founded it. I didn't do this all by myself. And in fact, I probably would have never gotten there all by myself. I have two co-founders. One of them is a fellow by the name of Joe Greenstein, who was the CEO of Flickster, the movie app. And then he bought Rotten Tomatoes, and then he had a big exit to Warner Brothers. And I was his executive coach throughout those years. And when he left, when he had his exit, he came to me and said, Carole, why don't you leave Stanford? Why don't we start something and bring everything that you teach at Stanford to the Valley? It's so sorely needed. And I said, oh, I'm really flattered, Joe, but I don't know. I don't think I'm a startup kind of person, and I'm too old. And besides, I love my students. I'm not leaving Stanford. Now, being the exceptional entrepreneur that he is, for 10 years, every 6 months, he came to me and said, what about now? What about now? And he kept getting the same answer, except that by 2017, I had gotten to the point where, as much as I loved my students, I could not spend another year fighting the system of an elite academic institution. I'm just going to leave it at that.
I have so many questions about that, but we can not go there if you prefer.
Which I probably won't answer. But it was really clear to me that I absolutely love my students, and the most painful decision I ever made in my professional life was to take early retirement. I had been there long enough to retire. I was not ready to retire, but to take early retirement and join Joe and our third co-founder, Sue Kim, who's the CEO of Brilliant.org, and who Joe and Sue had found each other, and then Sue had raised some money, and Joe said, hey, I think we need to go talk Carole Robin into doing this. And so then the two of them came to me, and anyway, that's a little bit of the origin story. And so, I said, okay, what the heck? And in January of 2018, we sent a couple of dozen emails to some of the VCs that we knew in the Valley, and some of the CEOs and founders who had big exits, because we wanted to position, and have always and continue to position, Leaders in Tech as a program for CEO founders pre-IPO. Because what we're interested in doing is influencing the culture of the future Facebooks and Googles and Microsofts of the world. I think those big companies are kind of too far gone, frankly. We'd like to start with earlier conditions where the leaders are actually committed and wanting to make developing a culture that's healthy and inclusive part of their mission. It's like, and Joe was the one who kept, and Sue, they kept saying, look, there's these companies that are doing these fabulous, innovative things when it comes to product, but they're not doing that when it comes to how they build their organizations, how people work together, which, by the way, is right in your wheelhouse, right? And that's kind of how they talked me into it. So anyway, we sent a couple dozen emails out, and we said, if you know anybody, any CEO founders pre-IPO, nominate them to be a fellow at Leaders in Tech. And we got 350 nominations in 2 weeks. At that point, I looked at the two of them and said, I guess this is what they call product market fit, huh? And we all kind of giggled, because I had said, well, maybe we'll start with 12. So we started with 24. Cohort 1 was 24. And we had to whittle down an awful lot of applications to 24 fellows. And our latest cohort of fellows, which is cohort 8, we had 1,300 nominations. So, and this cohort, we've grown, so this cohort is 72. But we continue to find that there are a lot of leaders out there really hungry for this, with very little knowledge about how to up their game when it comes to building strong connections and relationships, which is a whole other element of inspiring people and motivating people. You can only get so far with a really cool product, especially long term.
I'll drop this little bit for an Easter egg for folks listening. I have 250 copies of your book, Connect, alongside your co-author David Bradford. The subtitle is "Building Exceptional Relationships with Family, Friends, and Colleagues." That is going to be in hand for every attendee of Responsive Conference, because you are coming on stage at Responsive Conference, and we're so excited for that. When students went through Touchy Feely, or when these cohorts of entrepreneurs go through the leaders in tech, uh, talk to me, like, what are a couple of the tactics? What are a couple of the things that result in those moments of aha? Or, right, if I
Yeah.
could, I have a nephew who's 8 and one who's 11 right now, and if I could hope for anything for either of them, it would be moments in their teenage years, which were for me my toughest in my life,
Yeah.
of that hope and that optimism and that idea of expansion, of like, I don't know what's possible, but it's bigger than I think.
So I've got a couple of things that I want to say in response to that. The first is good leaders are good learners. And the best learners end up making the best leaders. So, um, to quote Carol Dweck, it's pretty hard to learn anything if you don't have a growth mindset, meaning you allowing for the possibility that the way you view the world and the things you believe are what make you successful are at least something you're willing to look at and analyze periodically. So a really core element of Touchy Feely of the Fellows Program is is the notion that we all develop mental models, beliefs and assumptions early in our life, to your point, about how we need to show up in the world to be viewed as credible, to be viewed as strong, to be viewed as leaderly, whatever words you want to use. And really early in our careers, those serve us. Um, but what happens is, and I can give you a personal example, which I may use at the conference, so it might be redundant, but some stories you can never tell too many times, right? But I can illustrate this probably the best with an example. So I went to work in 1975 for the largest industrial automation company in the world as the first woman hired in a non-clerical job. I was hired as a sales engineer because I had been a chemical engineering major. And actually, I was halfway through a master's in chemistry when I realized that I wasn't going to interact with any people if I became a chemist. So that wasn't going to work for me. Separate story. So I went to work for this organization. And the first thing I learned very quickly was whatever you do, there is no place in business for feelings. Leave them in the parking lot because nobody will take you seriously, especially as a woman, especially as a small woman. Once you come to the conference, you'll see that I'm a whopping 4'11", 98 pounds. So I learned very quickly that I needed to play the game, so to speak, the way all the men did, which was you leave your feelings at the door. And it
Unless
served.
it's anger, unless you're a man and it's
Correct,
anger.
correct, correct. And in fact, this is one of the things that I talk about a lot, which is men in particular, and not exclusively, but many men in Western cultures, and especially in the United States, are socialized with the notion that feelings are unmanly and not strong, make you look weak, unless it's anger and it's expressed in a good way, right? I mean, you got to learn how to express it in a way that's not destructive, but somehow that's okay. Now, it
Yep.
turns out, if you learn a little more about the research, that anger is actually a secondary emotion. Beneath anger, there is almost always either sadness, God forbid a man should admit they're sad,
Fear.
or fear. God forbid they should admit they're afraid, right? I'm going to look weak. So they lead with anger. I made this point not very long ago, a couple of years ago at another conference, and one of the participants, a woman, walked up to me at the end of the conference and said, "I just have to tell you that I have never understood my husband until this moment. It never occurred to me that all that anger actually had something deeper and more fundamental underneath it. Like, how sad is that? But how great is that?" She was like, "I've got a whole new way of thinking about what's going on." So this is what I mean by, like, it's not rocket science, although I used to say that a lot more often until I did a thing for all the executives at NASA. And at one point I said, "Come on, you guys, it's not rocket science." And they looked
And it is.
they were like, "Oh, Carole, this is so much harder than rocket science." So anyway, back to leave feelings at the door. So I developed this mental model. And I got very good at it. And I kept getting promoted. Now, I didn't get promoted only because I left feelings at the door. But I was a quick learner, and I had an opportunity to continue to, kept getting promoted, and I had opportunities to move. 10 years later, I'm actually managing a $50 million 13 Western state region. In those days, by the way, that was a lot of money. These days it's like, but I'm at an offsite with my team, and I get a little excited about something I think we could do, and I get crickets. I get a little more excited, crickets. Finally, I'm like, "You guys, come." They were all guys and ladies. I did finally fix that, but it took me a while. It took me a few more years. But I said, "Come on, you guys, what? This could be cool. What's wrong?" And one of them leans in like this, and he says, "Carole, is that water in the corner of your eye? Oh my God, are you going to cry?" And then he says, "Are you human after all? Are you human after all?" Then I burst out crying. And I said, "You don't think I'm effing human?" I did use the full expletive, but I don't want to offend anybody who might be watching. And I said, "I don't think there's anything more important for us to talk about than that." And we spent our 2-day offsite. I ripped up our agenda, and we spent our 2-day offsite talking about who we were, why we were there, what we wanted and needed, how we could help each other get that. To this day, I believe that was the day I became a leader. And to this day, I know for a fact that those men, a few of them were no longer with us on this earth, but the few who are still, well, the majority of them who are still with us would follow me anywhere. Because the question for you to think about as a leader is, why should somebody follow you? That's the question I ask my students to sit with. That's the question I ask our leaders and tech participants to sit with. And so, I do think that it's ironic that many years later, via a very, very circuitous route, I ended up teaching at Stanford and became known as the Queen of Touchy Feely, when early in my career, what had made me successful was learning how to leave all feelings in the parking lot, right? But it wasn't until I realized that I was paying a cost for that I was open to seeing that maybe it had served me and it had stopped serving me. So if we come back to what do people learn in Touchy Feely or lit, they learn that without emotions, the extent to which you connect with somebody else is going to be constrained, limited, because emotions are what make us human. So good luck forming deep, meaningful relationships if you refuse to ever talk about any feelings except anger. So I think I was lucky. I was so lucky that this guy who worked for me said that, and that in the moment I was like, wow, I've been sitting with a belief that has guided my behavior, that's informed my behavior, that is outdated. And if I were going to talk about one of the key things that happens in Touchy Feely, is that there's a lot of those. If you're vulnerable, people won't think you're strong. Well, they might think you're actually stronger because you were willing to admit you were vulnerable. If you talk about feelings, they'll think you're weak. Well, they might actually think you're strong. So there's all of these, again, beliefs, assumptions, mental models that get questioned. So that's about disclosure and becoming more known and allowing yourself to be more known. And there's a second really important part of updating mental models, which is around feedback. And the idea that the more I care about you, the more, and our relationship, the more I will tell you if you are doing anything that's getting in the way of us being as close as we could be, right? If you do something that distances me, if you do something that disappoints me, if you do something that saddens me, and I care about you and our relationship, why would I not tell you? And by the way, if you're doing it to me, and maybe you don't care about me, you might be doing it to someone else who do care about you.
Where is it happening
The most
elsewhere?
caring thing you can do is change your mental model around feedback, both when you get it and when you give it. But most people really don't know how to do it very well. And I will talk a lot at the conference in my keynote about how do you give and receive feedback well, because most people really don't know how to do it.
Let's go straight into that just for a couple of minutes. What are some often overlooked elements of giving and receiving feedback?
Well, the course is called Touchy Feely for a reason. People don't include how they're feeling in their feedback. So they're not behaviorally specific. Most people know that, especially your audience. That there are a lot of people involved in human resources and chief people officers, and most HR professionals or people who are inclined to learn more about that know that you've got to be behaviorally specific as opposed to making attributions or imputing motives. But let's say that you have shown up repeatedly to meetings late, and I'm getting more and more, I'm having feelings about that, right? So one thing I could say is, because most people have been taught to lead with I statements, but you know what they do then? I don't feel that you care enough.
Right. They blame using an I.
So, I don't feel you don't care enough is got not a single feeling word in it,
Right.
and it's an attribution. As opposed to, you know, for the last 6 meetings when you've shown up late and actually said nothing upon joining us, I have found myself becoming increasingly worried about what that means. And rather than make up any stories about what might be going on, I'm just curious. What is going on? So, first of all, feedback, people tend to think of feedback as, bleh, I'm just going to tell you, go fix it, as opposed to an invitation into a problem solving conversation. So, I'm asking you this, I'm asking you what's going on, because as I become more agitated and I start making up stories that I don't want to make up, and I feel more and more disappointed and let down, rather than continue to do that, I think we should talk about it. Imagine getting feedback like that. Most people don't know how to do it. And there's a whole model. It's in the book. It'll be, we'll talk about it at the conference. But most people, even the people that think they know how to give feedback, most of them are not all that good at it.
Well, credit where due to my collaborator. This is the first time you and I have exchanged words, but my dear friend of many years and collaborator on the conference, Marie, was adamant that you have 90 minutes on stage for a keynote and an interactive workshop. And I am so excited that our attendees get these tactics and if I can pay you a compliment, the gravitas of the container that you create, even just in this remote interview, right? You're able to capture the room, I'll say, right? Like, of course, my attention, but there's a weightedness, a depth, a gravitas to your description that is a very example of the qualities of leadership and of learning. I think that you are that you teach.
Thank you. I feel seen. I feel valued. And I feel appreciative, and I feel just a little bit, there's a little discomfort in that I don't like to be made too big a deal out of.
Well, in the spirit of,
it's not false humility. I do think that what I do is good, and I do think I'm good. I'm not trying to say that, but there's something about, I get a little.
As
But
somebody who started,
you mentioned Marie, Robin. One thing that I think is worth mentioning is after when we started Leaders of Tech, it was just for CEO founders, and then what happened is some of them came to us and said, "But what about my team? What about all of
yep,
my staff? How do I get this into my company?" So then we started offering, because the fellows program is a full year. Then we started offering these 4-day retreats, which is like Touchy Feely on steroids, frankly. And Marie went through one of those, and I think that was the beginning of her deciding this was something that she wanted to learn a whole lot more about and maybe bring to you and to the responsive team.
yeah, yeah. Um, that little bit of embarrassment, I think the day I stopped performing, whether that's on a podcast or doing backflips on stage, the day I stop feeling that little bit of embarrassment, I think is the day I stop having a drive to perform.
What
Right?
a good
There's
point. And by the way, love the reframe. And because language creates reality. The way we talk about things is what
it
creates the way
does.
we. And it reminds me of when my son was almost 13, and he was going to have a bar mitzvah, and the cantor asked him one day as they were studying, "Are you nervous?" And he said, "Yeah." And she said, "That's a good thing because it means you care,"
Hmm.
to your point. So I love the reframe. Thank you. I'll take it.
um, Tell me a little bit about, or talk to our audience a little bit about Leaders in Tech. You've mentioned these retreats, and obviously it's expanded from that first or second cohort where the co-founder of Responsive Org and our mutual friend Adam Pisoni participated. Who is Leaders in Tech for, and what is it that the organization is looking to do in the world today?
So our mission is to arm as many leaders in the tech ecosystem. And by the way, the tech ecosystem defined extremely broadly, um, with the skills and competencies they need to build long-term, sustainable, healthy, inclusive organizations. And so that's kind of at the core what our mission is. So who's it for? It's for any leader who thinks that that's an important element of building a strong, sustainable organization. And by the way, it sounds like, of course, that should be obvious. I'm always astounded at how many leaders do not think that's like all that important. And I would be willing to bet that a lot of people in your audience, I'll be speaking to the uh, to the choir, so to speak, with your audience, right? But I bet they've worked for or do work for executives who are like, yeah, that people stuff, kind of secondary. And I think that it gets harder to prove in using the kind of metrics that some people tend to believe are the only metrics worth looking at or worth valuing. But years ago, my co-founder, my co-author David, and I worked with a very large organization. It was actually a very large organization embedded within a huge organization, and the president of this organization had gone through the executive education version of Touchy Feely with us, and he asked us to come in and do something with his whole organization, which we did. Now, by the way, the chairman of the large conglomerate thought he was crazy, didn't understand why he was spending this money, but he was like, "Hey, I'm the president of this, of this unit, and I think this is important." Well, guess what happened a few years later? Suddenly, people from other divisions are saying, "What's going on over there? How come everybody over there wants to, talks about how much they love working there? And by the way, how can I come work over here even though I'm over in this area?" And by the way, then they started looking at real numbers. Their attrition was way less. And their ability to recruit top candidates was way higher. And the chairman never came around to believing this was worth investing money in, ever.
Yep.
So, okay.
A friend and a very early guest on the podcast once told me, and she was speaking about family dynamics, but I've taken it certainly into business. You can't change people, and actually, Robin, it's none of your damn business. It definitely had me, as you take a sip of water, do a spit take, but it's something that I've carried with me is the like, and this is something, my old teacher at Stanford, BJ Fogg, a longtime mentor and friend, said as well in different language. He said, don't try to persuade the unpersuadable, right? Find the people who already want what you are offering and help them do what they are trying to accomplish.
I have a yes and to that. I never say yes, but. I think but negates everything that's just been said. So I do think that a lot of people give up on influencing someone else before they needed to.
Yep.
So I do think that many people, not all, many people are more influenceable than we might think based on how they show up initially, but only if you find a way to talk to their interests. If you're only talking about your own interests, it's like, why should they change? Nobody's going to change for you. They don't, unless they really care about you, but they might change if they see where it's a benefit to them.
Right.
So if I couldn't have been in the business I've been in for 40 years if I didn't believe change was possible.
Yep. I love the example of your co-founder who spent 10 years every 6 months saying, are you ready to leave Stanford? Are you ready to leave Stanford? Clearly, we could continue this conversation for many hours. There's just one idea that I had that ties to the original manifesto of responsive.org that I wanted to kind of share and hear your reflections on.
Yeah.
The spirit, the ethos of responsive, as written by Adam and a woman named Alexis Gonzalez Black, who rolled out Holacracy at Zappos, and the 4 other co-authors, is that organizations struggle with these tensions or have to balance these tensions, right? In a world where the rate of change is constantly accelerating, as we have seen in the last decade. And this was written in 2014, 2015.
Yeah.
Profit versus purpose, hierarchical ways of working versus more networked ways of working, transparency versus privacy, right? Each of these is a continuum that needs to be balanced by an organization. And the reason for me that it resonated when I read it in 2015 is I'd seen these dysfunctions across 15 different industries at that point in my career. I'd seen people struggling, looking for one answer, and my intuition was there isn't one answer. And what you just described of you can't build a long-term successful business without human connection. You also have to have product market fit, or you have to have money in the door. You have to, right? And that is yet another continua of, are we talking about, I mean, it's profit versus purpose, but in some ways it's human connection versus the machine of the business, right? And actually the answer is it's both of those, or it's where do you fall on that today? Where are you putting your attention in this moment?
Yes.
Because you can't build an organization, you can't build a for-profit enterprise without money coming in, right? But you can't also build it without people, and people require human connection.
Yep. So I couldn't agree more. And I think it's interesting that you talk about it as a continuum. You talk about kind of shuttling continuums by definition, or shuttling along continuums. By the way, we have continuum about, with regard to relationships. At one end, there's contact and no connection, or dysfunction. At the other end, there's what we came to call exceptional. But in the middle, there's robust and functional. You don't have to turn every relationship into something exceptional, but boy, you better learn how to at least get to robust and functional.
Yeah.
And when you said profit versus purpose, I'm back to language creates reality. Versus already implies one has got to win, or one has got to be better, or one, and I don't believe that to be true. I believe it can be profit and purpose. And I do think that depending on where you are in the trajectory of the evolution of your organization, you might have to pay more attention to certain things than others. And by the way, think about what's happened since the pandemic. So much business has gone to remote, and so many people are, it's like, and you know what happens when we go remote? The task gets more and more foregrounded and the relationship gets more and more background.
Yep.
Unless, as a leader, you pay attention to that and you build in ways to maintain relationship, even virtually, which a lot of the lit fellows have learned how to do.
Nice. Well, as I say, we could easily go for 3 hours, you and I, having these conversations.
Yes.
Your book, I'll point everyone to Connect, Building Exceptional Relationships with Family, Friends, and Colleagues. Where else can folks go on the internet to learn more about you, Carole, and your work?
So if you go to my LinkedIn profile, Carole Robin LLC, or no, Carole Robin PhD, I don't remember what it is. There's a lot of Carole Robins. So make sure you get to Carole Robin PhD. It'll say Leaders in Tech, then you know you're in the right LinkedIn. There's also a link to my website. It's actually the book website. But if you go to the book website, the first thing you'll see is a link to Carole Robin AI. Now, let's talk about the irony for a moment of me having created an AI to help people learn how to develop stronger relationships with each other. The irony is not lost on me. But essentially, it's a companion to the book. So you're about to go into a meeting. You remember reading something about, how to raise a difficult issue and have the conversation be productive. You don't have the time to go back and go through everything you read earlier, or you never read it in the first place. You asked Carole Robin, so AI. So, what should I do in this meeting? And then it'll say, well, here are a couple of things for you to think about. And what's unique about doing that versus going to ChatGPT is that Carole Robin AI has only been fed stuff I have written. ChatGPT will claim Carole Robin has said all kinds of things, which I have never said. So there's that. And also on the website, if you go to media, there's a ton of links to articles and podcasts and all sorts of other resources. And the last thing I'll say is that there's a free downloadable set of activities, one of which is a self-assessment. You think you're really good at connecting with others? Try taking the self-assessment and then giving the same set of questions to 3 people in your life and compare the answers. Oh, gee, I thought I was a really good listener, and look at this. All these people say they don't often feel heard by me. There's a free downloadable Start Your Own Learning group. All you need is you could share a book. You don't even each have to buy one. And then it takes you, guides you through a whole way of creating a learning group and extracting all the lessons and applying all the lessons from the book. So those are a couple ideas.
Nice. One last quote,
Yes.
and this is from the top of the homepage of Leaders in Tech, which if folks are interested is leadersintech.org. You say, history will remember technology's leaders, not just for exceptional financial results, but for the values and integrity of the companies they built.
Exactly.
And
those words still give me, honestly, chills. I still feel a chill down my back and neck.
Yeah, right. People remember how you make them feel. And I struggle with that language because I don't make, exactly. right? But we don't make people feel anything, right? But people remember how they feel when they are with us. And
they will remember how they felt when they worked at a particular organization.
Yeah. Carole, thank you for the time. I'm so excited to welcome you on stage at Responsive Conference in a little under a month now. This is really going to be an exceptional session, and thank you for agreeing to it. Can't wait to meet you in person.
Likewise, I'm excited too. And by the way, I think Roy Bahat is also one of your speakers.
He
So,
is?
Roy
Yep.
and I go way back, way back.
Amazing.
And he has nominated many, many CEO founders to Leaders in Tech.
Yep.
So,
Yeah, Roy was the first person who read a copy of my book, Responsive, when I self-published that in 2017. He's been a longtime advocate of Responsive Org and now Responsive Conference. So
yeah,
I'm really excited to have him on stage.
fabulous,
Yeah.
Adam. So we're all kind of swimming in the same water, right?
All
Thank
right.
you, Robin. It's really, really been a pleasure to chat with you. And I'm super excited, psyched about attending the conference and giving more people an opportunity to know that these resources exist. At not a super, well, the book is not at a super high premium cost, and frankly, even the Leaders in Tech programs for what they are, they're certainly way, way, way less than you'd pay to go to the exec program at Stanford. And by the way, my curriculum is what the Stanford program was originally, and I'm not sure how much of it currently is.
Well, come to Responsive, get the book, and we'll see you in September, Carole.
Terrific.